Started. I just want to let you know if you can't find a seat, this is being streamed downstairs. You can watch it there as well. There are a few seats available here and there. So we will get going. My name is Kevin Vaughn. I know many of you, some of you I don't know. I'm a longtime reporter in Colorado, first in newspapers and now in television. And I was asked and honored to preside tonight as we remember the amazing life of Fred Brown, who did so much to contribute to this community through journalism, through his work on various projects, including the Society of Professional Journalists and the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition, where he was on the board for darn near 40 years. And I want to thank you all for being here. And I want to recognize that we have a lot of really incredible people here. I'm told that Denver Mayor Mike Johnston is here. Raise your hand if you are up here, Mayor. You may have snuck downstairs. We'll get him back. I'm told former First Lady Dottie Lamb is here. Good to see you. And I know everybody here is here because Fred Brown is special to them and they hold a special place in their heart for him. And I want to start by inviting Fred's wife, Mary Brown, up to say a few words.
Thank you all so much for being here too. Seen so many friends that I haven't seen for a long time and new friends that I see often because I have a lot of zoo friends here, friends of mine from the zoo, also friends from SPJ. There are some folks sitting in this row back here who come from Arizona and Ohio and Maine and Washington, D.C. Also, who can't be here tonight, Fred and I do not have many relatives. In fact, none of them could be here tonight. They live far away and have other things that are very important to them at this time. But Fred's sister wanted me to pass on some of her reminiscences, so I'm going to read that to you. I'm Fred's sister, Suzanne. Fred was my oldest brother, someone I looked up to all my life. He was technically my half-brother, being the son of my father, but to me, he was my brother. My earliest memory of him is from what I'm sure was one of the big milestones of his life. I could not have been more than 2 years old. I was sitting on the grass somewhere on what I later learned was the CSU campus in Fort Collins. I have this image of Fred approaching the family with a big grin on his face, looking very proud of himself. I had no clue what that was, but it sure seemed important. Fred graduated early after only 3 years at CSU with a degree in journalism and later went on to work on his graduate degree at Northwestern University. I did not see Fred a lot in those early years since he entered college the year I was born. But he was home on the holidays and it was during those times that we bonded. We moved to Argentina while Fred was in grad school. I have a memory from that time of my parents receiving an important letter from him in which he stated he had met someone. Then, from my recollection, another letter followed, not long after, announcing that this special someone was named Mary, and he, in fact, was going to marry her. I remember my parents delighted with the news. That was the start of a long and beautiful relationship of two people I could not admire more. Fred and Mary were a team, and I believe were a match made in heaven. Maybe. One of my favorite images of the two of them is from a visit they made to our home in Maryland Fred was wearing a wild psychedelic tie that perfectly matched the pattern of Mary's wild psychedelic scarf. I think I remember that. I still have the photo and it's quite a throwback. As the years went by, we visited Fred and Mary in Aurora. I saw them quite often on my travels to Colorado when I worked for the Forest Service and had to visit the regional office. There were many fond memories from those times. Mary's delicious home-cooked dinners. I don't know that she remembers that. Dinners out, visiting our old family house in Boulder, shopping and bike rides around Cherry Creek Reservoir. Fred was one of the nicest people I knew and always seemed up for anything. Therefore, I was not that surprised when I found out that he and Mary went skydiving in their 60s. He did. He also liked model trains, an interest he shared with my husband, John, and was happy to show us his latest train accessories when we visited. Fred and Mary played important roles in my life. He was one of John's groomsmen, and Mary was my matron of honor when my husband and I married. I still remember Fred's toast at our wedding that had everyone laughing. He had that dry sense of humor that people loved. Fred was many wonderful things, but punctuality was not one of them. I remember he was to meet at the Denver airport when I was flying in from a work trip in Sheridan, Wyoming, but a huge snowstorm delayed the plane by 2 hours. This was before cell phones. When we landed, there was no sign of Fred, so I assumed he gave up and went home. After waiting at the terminal for a while, I decided to hop on the shuttle to go to the main airport area. And just as I was about to board the train, here comes Fred, frantically running from around the corner of the building and exclaiming, "I'm so sorry, I'm late. I had a press conference." It all worked out. Fred was a wonderful person and deserved all the good things he accomplished in life. It was obvious he loved life and people and the work he did. I read his book on journalism ethics. It was a testament to all of the knowledge and wisdom he acquired over the course of his amazing career. And he certainly lived up to the moniker Ethical Fred, which was his email account. He did not like injustice, and I understand he took that to an extreme once he got beer banned from the press room of the city. I heard that people weren't too happy about that, but who could stay mad at Fred? He was such a positive person, and I'm sure a silly joke would smooth over everything. His sense of justice was shown in the most unexpected ways. For instance, I could always remember Fred's cell phone number because it made a statement about a certain injustice. It was 303-829-4647, or TAXHOGS, tax hogs. A not so subtle protest of the cell phone's treatment of its customers. I never forgot it. I will miss calling tax hogs. I will miss my big brother. He seemed timeless to me. I thought he'd always be around. Goodbye, Freddie. You'll always be here in my heart. Reading some of the things that folks have said about Fred, and I understand how they have been heartfelt and greatly believed. Among the things that I've heard and that have been said about Fred is he was wise, and another of the things that I have heard a lot was that he was unflappable, that he was always cool, calm, dry sense of humor, and he was. I have one illustration of that I'd like to share with you tonight. It happened on one of our travels. We've been lucky enough to have traveled a lot, especially since we retired. And one of our favorite places was Africa. And one time, not too terribly long ago, we were at a safari camp in South Africa, near the Sand River, on the Sand River, just outside the Big Kruger National Park. We were on a game drive. It was an afternoon, early evening drive, and it was just the two of us and our driver, ranger, who was and we were all in one of those open Land Rovers, the kind that you can see forever. And as we were driving, the rangers said that maybe we would like to stop and see if we could see some hyena cubs. But there was a den nearby, and there were some cubs, and if we were lucky, we might have a chance to see them. So we drove to the area of the den and parked off to the side so we wouldn't disturb the animals, and sat and talked for a while, and it was very quiet. Nothing, nobody around, not a single soul, it seemed. And we were just about to give up and go back to the camp for dinner when out of the den emerged one lonely hyena. We were talking softly to ourselves a moment off to the side, and we all agreed that this must be the lowest ranking male hyena in the land. Everybody else was out having fun or hunting, whatever they were doing, and they had left behind this one solitary hyena to keep track of the kids, to babysit the cubs. While we sat there watching him, he looked around and he started toward the vehicle. And he got closer and closer. And then he was right beside us. And he put his paws up on the fender, the wheel well of the vehicle, not a foot from Fred's elbow. Time stood still. It seemed like an eternity before the ranger started banging on the side, on the door of the vehicle. And the hyena looked at us again, looked so intelligent. Fred, meanwhile, is not moving a muscle. After what seemed like a long time, but probably was no more than 2 seconds, he dropped back to the ground and walked away. And that is why Fred, ever since, has said that his favorite animal is a hyena. You may have noticed that Suzanne called Fred Freddie at the end of her message to him. That's because Fred was a junior. His father was Frederick Winfield Brown. So he was Frederick Winfield Brown Jr. And his signature always included the full name. And we never thought a lot about it until the AI folks recently started calling him Brownger. Fred was proud of that name, and with good reason. He was passionate about several things, including that. You're going to hear more this evening about his involvement with journalism ethics, something that was extremely dear to his heart and that he advocated for all of his life. But the one thing I want to leave you with tonight is that I am so grateful to the Front Range Railway people who have decided, after deliberation and seriously considering it, not to call their new commuter railway Fred.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was really nice. Is Mayor Johnston here? He left. All right, I'll cross him right off the agenda. Mark Harden is here. He was a longtime colleague of Fred's, both in the Denver Post newsroom and in the Society of professional journalist. Mark, could you come up and share stories, say a few words?
And thanks to everyone for being here. Mary, thank you for sharing those thoughts. That was wonderful. A reading from the works of Fred Brown. Seek truth and report it and think. Shunning favors, free tickets, and drink. Please minimize harm and sound the alarm when someone goes over the brink. Fred Brown loved limericks. And so he composed that one in 2002 as an ode to something he cherished, the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. Fred believed that for journalists to stand tall, they need a backbone constructed of core principles. Seek truth and report it. Minimize harm. Act independently. Be accountable and transparent. It's a code of professional conduct that Fred spent much of his adult life crafting, revising, and commenting on as a leader at SPJ at the local, regional, and national level. Fred was tireless in promoting and bettering journalism and upholding its professional standards. I think it's fitting that we're gathered tonight to remember Fred in a building that serves as a shrine to excellence in journalism. Fitting because Fred helped all of us define what journalism excellence is. Fred was a former president of Denver Press Club, and in 2003, he was enshrined in the Press Club Hall of Fame. At CSU, he was one of the first technical journalism majors when that program started in 1961. He was editor of the CSU Collegian and was one of the first inductees into CSU's Media Hall of Fame 50 years later in 2011. After graduating, as Mary mentioned, in 3 years, Fred worked briefly at the Bend County Democrat and the Boulder Daily Camera. And then after earning his master's degree from Northwestern in '63, he landed his dream job at the Denver Post. Fred spent decades covering government and politics at the Post, which is where I worked with him for several years and where he brilliantly led our state government coverage. At the time, in the early 1990s, I sometimes referred to him around the newsroom as Right Said Fred, after a flashy MTV pop band of that era. When you think about it, that's also a pretty apt nickname for a guy known for dispensing truth about journalism. Fred was also a longtime political analyst at Denver's 9 News, and he taught journalism ethics at the University of Denver. At SPJ, Fred was our brother, our mentor, our guiding light, and our ethical spirit. He served a term as National SPJ President in 1997, and at times was our Rocky Mountain Region 9 Director and also President of our Colorado chapter. At the time of his death, he was a member of the board of the SPJ Foundation, which supports our society's educational mission. Journalistic ethics were always front of mind for Fred, so much so that, as Barry mentioned, his email address began with Ethical Fred. He was a former chair of SPJ's National Ethics Committee. He helped rewrite its code of ethics and wrote and edited SPJ's ethics book. Nearly 3 decades ago, he first proposed the idea of SPJ's Ethics Week. Not long after Fred's death, SPJ's National Board voted to rename its annual award for ethics the Fred Brown SPJ Ethics in Journalism Award. We thank Dan Axelrod, the current National Ethics Chair for SPJ, for proposing that name. In 2006, SPJ honored Fred with its Wells Memorial Key, its highest honor for outstanding service to society. In nominating Fred, Deb Hurley-Probst, who's here tonight, who is now our chapter president, wrote this, quote, "Fred is always there. He stands for the principles that SPJ holds dear: honesty, integrity, intelligence, and an incredibly strong commitment to journalism ethics." In 2024, our chapter presented Fred with our Journalist of the Year award. Now, outside of his official roles, Fred was always generous in sharing his insights, either as a teacher, as a guest speaker in classrooms, or in picking up the phone when journalists called seeking advice. And Fred's personal qualities came through as powerfully as his guidance about journalism. Adam Schrager, a former political reporter who was Fred's colleague at 9 News, said that Fred, quote, was the most decent and patient man I have ever met in the political world. Tonight, we remember not just Fred's devotion to journalism, but also his devotion toward his family and friends and his zest for life and adventure. From swimming and cycling to volunteering at the Denver Zoo and close encounters with hyenas. In the news business, he is known for sharp elbows and loud opinions, sometimes too loud. Fred Brown was a gentleman, a centered and grounded man with vast talent and a bone-dry wit. Recently, I was privileged to work alongside Fred again, this time on our SPJ Colorado chapter board as we took up causes he cherished. Fred meant a lot to me, personally and professionally, and his passing hits hard. I know that all of us here tonight will always hold Fred close, and our hearts go out to Mary and all who knew and worked with him. I also know that in the days ahead, when many of us wrestle with an ethical dilemma, we'll pause and ask ourselves, what would Fred Brown do? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for reminding us all of the many, many ways Fred Brown made this place, this world a better place. Robert Ledger has also been involved in SPJ for many years, traveled from Arizona to be here tonight. Robert, would you come up, please, and say a few words?
Thank you to Doug Bell, who invited me to speak. He could have asked any of the four of us who have traveled from across the country. And I do want to shout out to these folks because together we make up 20 years, as one of my colleagues pointed out, of the presidency of the SPJ Foundation. For much of us, at that time it was the SDX Foundation, but that would be in order. Steve Guyman, who was 2006 to 12. I was 12 to 18. Erwin Gratz from Maine was 2018 to 2022, and Hakit Lamore has been serving since, and you'll hear from her later tonight. And I just think it speaks to the impact Fred had on SPJ nationally that the four of us are here to honor. Now, as last speaker just mentioned, limerick. Fred was also a master of the haiku. There were not many board meetings where at some point in the meeting, he summed up whatever complicated issue we were talking about in 17 syllables. I wish we had kept all of them. But of course, much of their power was in the dry delivery, that radio voice of his, and that oracle quality he had. He also took an occasional shot at writing a headline. Told us about this one over beers at some meeting somewhere. The Denver Zoo's marmoset had just given birth. Now, these marmosets are these little bitty monkeys from South America, but the babies are huge relatively. The equivalent of a 150-pound woman giving birth to about a 30 or 40-pound baby. Ouch. So Fred had suggested this headline. Marmoset, there'd be days like this. There'd be days like this, marmoset. Didn't use it. Something. And Mary came down to Phoenix occasionally to follow the Rockies. And I think we went to a game with you. You came over to dinner once. And I don't remember if it was at that point or at some other point, Fred and I discovered something else. I had to fix, I'm from southern New Mexico. So big fan of Hatch red chili enchiladas, sorry, better than Colorado. And as we talked, at some point, we discovered we had grandmothers who spoke Spanish, only Spanish. So Fred was SPJ's first Latino president. I was his second. And this still surprises people because how could two white guys feels, that's not because they don't understand Southwestern colonial history. But what I really want to share about Fred has nothing to do with little bitty monkeys or enchiladas or genealogy. It's about the saddest day in SPJ history and how Fred turned it around. August 11th, 2000, Indianapolis. 4 SPJ leaders sat glumly in the executive director's office about to sign off on the settlement of a libel suit. The worst part, it involved a case study in our ethics handbook. That's right, we violated our own ethics code in the most visible way possible. I suppose it's ironic that the book's cover shows journalists walking a tightrope. Now, that was not one that Fred had edited. He contributed to it, but there were other people who had edited it. But in the course of it, sloppy work by a volunteer had gotten past multiple editors, leaving mud on everybody's faces. SPJ, the foundation, the 3 nationally known experts in journalism ethics who had edited the book, the Poynter Institute, which had partnered with us, and the publisher. It was bad. And the settlement was public. We are journalists, we insist on transparency. So you can look it up if you're so inclined. Very little money changed hands, but the settlement required a lot of apologizing. A whole lot. And Fred, as chair of the ethics committee, was quoted in the press release. He said, or was quoted as saying, quite simply and literally, it is wrong to make mistakes, even inadvertent ones. That's the first principle of journalism and the first principle of the SPJ Code of Ethics. As an organization that has a long and proud history of promoting ethical, responsible journalism, we should admit our mistakes, and as our code says, abide by the same high standards to which we hold others. Always on point, always right. So the ethics book was dead. The publisher had no interest in revising and reissuing it. Why take the risk? The big name editors, they had walked away. Poynter wanted nothing to do with SPJ. So in a flash, our reputation as a leader in journalism ethics was gone. So who saved it? All together now? It took several years to regain the copyright and publishing rights. While the lawyers negotiated, Fred and the ethics committee started writing new chapters. They kept some of the old ones while jettisoning moldy ones, and of course, defending one. Fred negotiated with Marion Fig Press to publish the 4th edition. It took a decade, but SPJ was once again leading the cause for ethical journalism. Now, most people would have been happy with such a monumental achievement. Not Fred. He couldn't rest on his laurels. Shave for one thing. Within a couple of years, he was working on the next edition. In memos to the foundation board, he described a book that might be published online only. It would include PR and other communication professions. And in March 2018, he wrote, "I'm willing to write, compile, edit, and collaborate to finish everything as soon as possible." Now, the monetized online edition didn't work out, but the 5th edition was self-published in paperback in 2020. On Amazon, it rates 4.6 stars. And in the introduction, Fred made an observation that will remain relevant as long as true journalism persists. Mainstream media will survive only if they insist on providing accurate, reliable, and fair information. Let others give readers what they want to say. The ethical journalist's duty is to give them information they need to make sound decisions. Information that may challenge assumptions rather than simply affirm preconceptions. That sense of responsibility is what separates an ethical journalist from a slapdash polemicist. Fred Brown, Ethical Fred, wrote the book on journalism ethics. Not once, but twice. That's a legacy.
Thank you, Robert. Steve Zansberg has spent decades fighting the forces of secrecy in our public institutions and among our elected officials, and is the president of the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition, on whose board Fred served for all of its existence. I'd invite Steve up with a couple of special presentations.
Kevin, and thank you all for coming to honor such a great man. His loss is immeasurable to us. Heart goes out to you. I knew Fred for 30 years. I got to Colorado in 1996 and started serving on the Colorado Freedom of Information, then Council, and now the Coalition. And Fred was, I believe, then the treasurer. No, I keep saying that. The secretary. He kept the notes, and he's impeccable, making sure that they didn't include comments that weren't appropriate. And I also knew him through my work for journalism organizations, media companies here in Colorado, across the nation, where Fred was obviously instrumental, and his works were cited quite frequently. You know, people mentioned the SPJ Code of Ethics that Fred was instrumental in drafting and redrafting and perfecting. A lot of people think of it as just seek truth and report it, minimize harm, act independently, and be accountable and transparent. Those are the four main headings, but those of you who haven't looked it up, I encourage you to go online and read the Code of Ethics. It really is just an incredible document for anyone who wants to act ethically. His whole life. So much so that he it's been mentioned of the textbooks he wrote, the 5th edition of the Media Ethics as well. He was incredibly prolific, and you know, among the qualities that those of you who knew Fred knew, Mary mentioned wise and unflappable, and I think of other qualities, including witty, as we've heard, like news and bricks, incredibly fair, even-handed, and perhaps most importantly, kind and generous. Fred was always willing to give of his time and energy, and a tremendous teacher and mentor to many in this room and far beyond. So much so that when he covered politics for the Denver Post, was mentioned early on. This morning, in the state Senate, at the direction of the request of Senator Mark Baisley, this morning we and I just want to read what the declaration was read this morning from Jeff and Hugh. Many of you were there. Couldn't make it, but it reads, Frederick Winfield Brown is being honored. He was a veritable giant on the political and governmental scene in Colorado, serving for more than half a century, countless roles, including as a journalist, commentator, and good government advocate. Fred left an indelible impression upon all who had the honor and privilege of knowing him. To some, he was known as Ethical Fred. Others, Mr. Smarty Pants. Yet, regardless of how he was known, he merited universal renown, one gentle, fair, brilliant, and principled. The Senate, together with generations of Fred's associates, mentees, and friends, solemnly remember Fred Brown and expresses its heartfelt condolences to Fred's beloved wife. Now, in my role as president of the board of the Colorado Freedom of Information, I'm going to bestow on Mary this Dean Honor, which is not named after a former and founding with Fred, one of the founders of our Freedom of Information Coalition. It is bestowed only on those who have attributed over their lifetime and career sustained contribution to freedom of information. And it reads, the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition hereby honors Fred Brown with the 2026 Keynote Fred of Freedom Award, in recognition of his decades of unflinching advocacy for greater governmental transparency and freedom of information, as well as unsurpassed contributions to ethics and journalism.
Thank you. Tina was a.
Be very well deserved. I was very happy when we made this decision. So this deserved award on our friend Fred. Kelly Bacher, the People and Culture Manager at the Denver Zoo, is here. Kelly, I invite you up to talk a little bit about Fred.
It's been such an honor to sit here and listen to all of the incredible stories. My name is Kelly Boggart. I have the great privilege of serving as volunteer manager at the Denver Zoo Conservation Alliance, which is where I've gotten to know and love Mary and Fred over the past many years. At our zoo, we have several core values that we live by. And one of those core values is to be courageous, which we define at our zoo as doing the right thing, even when it's the hard thing. If there's one thing I'll always admire about Fred, it's that he did just that. I have learned a ton about Fred in the last month or so, and being here this evening as well. And one of the things that's very clear to me is that courage is what defines so much of his life. I've learned that in journalism, Fred wasn't just respected, but he was trusted. Ethical Fred, they called him. I've read that lots tonight. A steady voice and someone people turned to when the truth and the path forward wasn't clear. Fred didn't just report on the world, he held truth and integrity at the center of it. What strikes me most is that he brought that same courage with him to our zoo. Fred didn't just come to volunteer because it was easy or it was expected. As Mary shared with me, it almost happened by accident. But once he said yes, he showed up fully. He leaned into learning, into connecting, into growing, into helping others do just the same. As a docent, Fred had a way of meeting people where they were. He made conservation feel real, personal, and possible. He didn't just share facts, he invited people to care. And that takes courage too. It's not always easy to ask others to see the world differently, to take responsibility for it, and to protect it. But Fred did just that with patience, humility, and heart. Behind the scenes, he was just as impactful, serving as a mentor to our new docents, encouraging them, guiding them, and reminding them that learning never really stops. He modeled what it meant to stay curious, to stay open, and to keep growing no matter where you are in life. For me, that's one of the greatest lessons that he leaves me with. That doing the right thing isn't always loud or dramatic, but sometimes it looks like showing up, asking questions, supporting others, choosing integrity, choosing curiosity, and choosing care. Fred did all of those things again and again, and because of that, his impact reaches far beyond the years that he spent with us at the zoo. It lives on in the volunteers that he mentored, in the guests that he inspired, and in every person who walked away thinking that just a little differently about their role in this world. Fred made things better. He made them more thoughtful, more ethical, more connected, and we're lucky to have known him. Mary, thank you for sharing him with us, for encouraging him and giving him that extra nudge to start volunteering with you. And to Fred, thank you for showing us what it looks like to live with courage.
Well, thank you so much. That was beautiful. Finally, Hagit Lamore is here from SPJ's Foundation Board, and I'd like to invite her up to tell us more about Fred.
I don't know what I can say about Fred, because honestly, I've only known him for a little time compared to most of you, a little time being a couple of decades. Thank you so much for inviting me and Mary, for just having been just such a sweet person that we met. You came to conventions and to meetings, and we always so look forward to the times that you came, and we were really sad when you didn't. We liked Fred, but you know, it's really an honor to speak to you guys, just to say a few words about a man that oftentimes, in my experience, also just said a few words, but they were always the right words to sway the target audience, whether that was in a news story or in a board meeting, or sometimes maybe with a group at the end of the day at the bar. He always had the right words. He wasn't the most verbose. You know, there were people that we talk on and on and on. And no, he got to the point, and it was the right point and well said. Most of you here knew Fred locally, but people all over the country know Fred. He made an impact. I met him walking down some uneven brick paver street in Greencastle, Indiana. It was 2009, and it was the 100th anniversary of Sigma Delta Chi. Fraternity started by 10 men. In fact, we didn't admit women for a very long time. And Jean Otto was our first female national president in 1980. But, you know, it became the Society of Professional Journalists, and we were there to commemorate this auspicious moment, 100th birthday, by returning to where it had all begun, which was DePaul University in Indiana. And I was brand new to SPJ. Fred was not. I was in awe. By then, he had already won all kinds of accolades as a writer, you know, journalist, on and on, all the things that you have heard tonight. That's one advantage of being last, is you've heard it. You to repeat. But you know, he was ethical Fred. And in the annals of SPJ, new people coming into SPJ, that is how we knew him. He was this figure up on a pedestal. But unlike so many people, he faded away after his year as president of SPJ. That was only Fred's beginning. I know Mary thought it was a one-year term, and it turned into a 4-decade sentence. Two highlights. First of all, you've heard about the ethics. I'm not going to repeat things, all the code and books. He became one of the most influential voices about media ethics in the country. He was widely quoted when people would call us at SPJ about an issue that involved ethics. Fred was a go-to. But he also joined, as SPJ president, the SDX Foundation, which is now the SPJ Foundation. And you've already heard that there are 2 decades worth of presidents here, because every one of us depended on Fred's wise counsel. He was someone that you could call at any time. He would listen. I don't know if I interrupted dinners or what. There is a time zone difference. I'm sorry, Eric. But he would listen, and then he would just give you a succinct and perfect answer. back to those uneven pavers in Greencastle, Fred sidles up to me and he starts asking questions like the true reporter that he was, but he does it with such disarming charm that I did not realize this was a reconnaissance mission, which it was, because I was new to SPJ, but there was some thing going on and they were trying to recruit me to do this. He was asking all these questions, and I totally get a sense of why he was such a successful journalist, because he asked tough questions with grace. He was kind and respectful. He made everybody feel special while he was talking to them. And years later, I faced a dilemma that Fred had gone through, he navigated through, about whether to leave the newsroom, the calling I loved so much, to go teach at a university. Because at the time, even a full-time tenured job seemed like maybe giving up, maybe giving in. And Fred told me of the joy that he felt when he knew that as a professor, you were actually the impact of journalism. Because instead of just telling the stories you would have told, you are now helping dozens and hundreds of people tell stories. You can frame it. It's like, duh, how come I didn't think of that whole business, Fred? So I became a student of his as well. And I'm sure Fred mentored probably, that big sizable group in this room. He was special because, as I said, he made everybody else feel special. So you heard the Society of Professional Journalists has renamed our Ethics Award, the Fred Brown SPJ Ethics and Journalism Award. We just presented it for the first time last week. And it was to a group of students from Indiana University and some others from Purdue University who supported them. And what happened was the administration of Indiana University told the students of the paper that they were not to publish anything negative anymore. The only issues they were allowed to publish were big homecoming issue, nice positive news. And those students just walked out and created their own publication. That's the first group that got that award. I know that he's thinking about it. I know that he's seeing it. So in addition, I'm going to wrap up by presenting something as well. SPJ has put together this plaque that I want to award. I've got a plaque for Mary and I've got some certificates for the other organizations that he's left. But first, there's too many things on here. So we have a plaque from the Society of Professional Journalists. The board of directors honors and remembers Fred Brown in recognition of his passion, ethical journalism, and his tireless advocacy of fellow journalists. Presented May 7, 2026. Mary, if you can come up. And also, we have a similar, I dropped it all, of course. We have certificates saying much the same to the groups that Fred supported, led, and loved. So there are certificates here to give to the SPJ Colorado Pro chapter, the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition, the Denver Post, 9 News, the University of Denver, and the Denver Zoo. Fred. I was going to finish with a haiku, but it's already been read. Apologies for being one of the last people up here, but I really I'm so thrilled to see all of you here in this room, because all of us are so much blessed to have shared any space in whatever capacity with Fred. He was a singular individual. I am not even believing that I will ever attend another SPJ event and not see his smiling face bounding in. But his memory will be there at every single time. Thank you all.
Augie, thank you so much. That was really nice. We're gonna throw the microphone open for other people to tell stories. I am going to start. I was one of those geeky kids that was reading the newspaper as a youngster. Mostly the comics and the sports section in the early years, but by the time I was in junior high, I was reading Denver Post and the Rocky Mountain News just about every day. And for a while in junior high school, I was a Denver Post paper boy. And so I think before I even got to high school, I knew who Fred Brown was, or I should say I knew his byline. I couldn't have picked him out of a lineup, but I knew that byline. And so fast forward many years later, in 1997, I came back to Denver after working in other parts of the state, joined the Rocky Mountain News. And in the last week of the 2000 presidential campaign, one of the joys of being on the Saturday shift is that you end up covering God knows what. Bill Clinton came to town to stump for his vice president, Al Gore, and he had like 5 events around town. And the organizers got an old white Ford van, and there were about a half dozen of us reporters that went to all of them. And I found myself sitting next to Fred in the backseat of this van. And of course, I had a little fanboy moment. And I introduced myself, and Fred could not have been more kind, more gracious, more chatty. It was the first time I'd ever talked to him. And then the next morning, the Denver Post came, and I realized that Fred had kicked my butt up one side of the street and down the other. And I couldn't even be mad about it because he was so kind and so gracious and so helpful. And in recent years, since I've been involved with the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition, it's been such a joy to share with others in his wisdom and his commitment to the principles that we stand for and to the things that I think we all believe in. And I think we've heard tonight, you know, what an extraordinary series of contributions that he has made to journalism, to ethics, to open government, and to our community and to the nation. So thank you all who have spoken. And I would invite anybody else who would like to come up, and I will start with Mary Ann Goodland in the back. Her hand went up first. You're next.
Yeah. Everybody knows Fred knows his lots of stories, so I have. The first is and the first is my own personal journey in getting to know Fred. I joined the state capitol press corps in 1998, and for some stupid reason, I haven't been able to get rid of it. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mary Ann Goodland. I'm past president of the Denver Press Club and the dean of the state capitol. When I started at the state capitol, I didn't come from a traditional journalist background. I hadn't been to J school. I knew First Amendment law from my master's degree. I knew, and I was a good writer, but I wanted to make sure that I knew the things that were really important about being a good journalist. And what I keyed in on was ethics, media ethics. And Fred was my guide. For the first 4 years that I was there, I learned from him and was around him as much as I could possibly be to learn about being a good ethical journalist, somebody who was so respected as Fred was. It just really mattered to me. So I've always been grateful for that. The second has to do with, yes, Jeff. Jeff, where's your chicken? Mary, where's your chicken? For those of you who might not have been hanging around the country capitol for the last 45 years, I choose the rubber chicken. That I believe Fred may have had something to do with it. This is the original rubber chicken.
This is the chicken. This is.
This is the chicken that Fred would throw over a transom into the women's bathroom.
Why? So, I don't know why I somehow gained possession of this chicken, but when I left, I'm Jeff Robert. Freedom of Information Coalition and was Fred's colleague at the Denver Post. When I left the Capitol Bureau in 1980, I somehow got to keep this. I still.
And they're so grateful. And then Mary has, this is I believe a ceremonial. It must be a ceremonial chicken. It's in a tuxedo. It has a roll of actual film. And it has full of pen. I don't know how he got it. I don't remember. We've had it for decades and it's falling apart. So,
You want to see fun.
to tell you about the latest iteration of Jennifer Gavin, I was talking to her one day and she asked, was there a rubber chicken at the state capitol? This was a couple of years ago and I was like, well, no. And she said, well, it's tradition. I said, by golly, we got to resurrect this. So I went out and acquired rubber chicken number 3. Now I realized a couple of weeks ago, actually about 2 months ago, that it had never been properly initiated. It had just been sitting in the basement Capitol press room for a couple of years. So we all started thinking about what would we want to do to initiate this chicken. And what we did is that we went up to the 3rd floor press room. We dangled it out the window and flew it in front of the governor's office. In front of the governor's office.
Sorry.
Perfect. And there's a great video out there. If you go on the Colorado Politics website, it's on my Capitol. And the governor is standing in front of the window while the chicken is going back and forth like this. And he's like, what is that? Luckily, I had an insider in their staff who videotaped the whole thing. It was great. So this was on April 4th, which unfortunately was also the day that Fred passed. But I thought it was a perfect send-off for our ethnic Fred. And one more little story to tell about Fred. And this was a story that he relayed to me as he was retiring in 2002. And he did this Friday column, and they mentioned it this morning in the State Senate tribute. It was mouth reading. If you were anybody in politics, even whether you were a journalist, a lawmaker, or somebody who was just fascinated by politics, Fred's column was a must read. So at the beginning of 2002, as he was planning to retire, he decided that he was going to take the first letter of every column that he did on Fridays. Mary knows his story. I can see her laughing. This is great. He decided that he was going to take the first letter of every column, on every Friday column, and he was going to use a particular letter. And when he got to the very last column that he did before he retired, if you took the first letter of all of those columns and lined them up, it said, I am so out of here. Great. And I told this story at his retirement because he had told me and I figured everybody knew about it. His editor, I believe at the time, was Dan Haley. And as it turns out, Dan didn't know about it. Those are my favorite, very fond memories of our year.
Good evening. My name is Ernest Goudelet. Mary, thank you for your presence tonight, and I want to let you know, as I told you earlier, when I learned of Fred's passing, it simply broke my heart. I knew him for a long, long time. And before I get any farther, I have to tell you, you will not be witnessing Demosthenes tonight, and in a few minutes that will be confirmed. I knew Fred Brown, and I knew him for a long time. I knew him actually for decades. I knew him when newsrooms were cacophonies of keys striking on endless reams of paper. I knew him when gossip, rumors, facts, and smoke filled newsrooms. I knew him before the gray on his head had lost the battle to the brown. And I knew a man who was simply full of grace. Unlike many of you, I cannot honestly say that Fred was my friend, but that is only because our paths crossed so infrequently. And when they did, sadly, all too briefly, but even then, our conversations were warm and his sincerity so perfectly genuine. I could not return anything, certainly enough, from our all too brief chats, anything but honest, undiluted collegiality and sincerity, and of course, respect. Such were those moments. Other memories of Fred that I recall include his dress, always natty, understated, lots of earth tones, lots of tweed. And despite the job that carried an unseen but omnipresent flashing beacon deadline, he apparently subscribed to the late John Wooden's axiom of hurry but don't rush. And he never seemed to be rushed. He moved, at least to me, like a 3D phantom in an almost slow motion fashion, perhaps in a hurry, but always ready to stop and say a simple hello, a tip to confirm a this or that, or to nail down a source, or, as we all know Fred, a simple truth. I knew Fred from news conferences, including a few that go way back, when the press corps was visibly different. Just an aside, when Fred walked into the room, the Latino head count catapulted by 0.5. Knowing him from the Capitol would make me one of many, perhaps one of many thousands over the years. Way back when it was the Capitol where reporters, radio, and newspaper actually outnumbered television. And I remember once at the Capitol, Fred and I were talking about the old press room. Back in the day, there was a guy by the name of Jack Fitzpatrick. He was straight out of central casting. He would talk rat-a-tat-tat with a cigarette in his mouth. And he was a delightful guy. And Fred knew him, and he kind of accepted Jack for who he was. But that was Fred. He accepted everybody for who they were. And my homage to Fred tonight is something that is not going to be nearly in the class of Fred's limericks. And out of deference and out of respect for Fred, the limerick that I have composed contains neither the word Nantucket nor Venus. There once was a man named Fred Brown, ink-stained, always around, giving good, sound advice while listening, oh, so nice. God damn, I'm going to miss old Fred Brown. So goodbye, Fred. Travel well.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak? Is Barry Johnson here by chance? Apparently not. Laura, come on up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Frank. I was on the board here at the Press Club for 8 years, and I'm the Lozine professor at the University of Denver. So Fred's legacy is with me in many ways, but I want to talk about one way. My husband and I were married in this very room about 3 years ago, and Fred Brown is partially responsible for us getting married. Here's how. A few years ago, Fred and I were on a panel for the Colorado Press Association convention, of course, about ethics. And Fred had a little bit of trouble getting online. It was during COVID. And I helped him with some technical things while we were, and it was all recorded. So my husband, when we were dating, he's a former prosecutor. He's the only person I ever dated who actually backgrounded me, which is why I married him. The reason he married me is because when he was backgrounding me, he found this video of Fred and I and thought that I was so kind and gentle and would be fine to date. What he didn't know was that anyone who was interacting with Fred Brown, the most kind, gentle person, would look that way to them. So I just want to say, Mary, that I will get to spend the rest of my life with the love of my life because in part of the love of your life. And I am eternally grateful to Fred and to you.
Laura? Who else? Anybody? All right, this has been a great tribute to a great person. And I would invite you all to stick around, make acquaintances. I've run into some people tonight I haven't seen in a long time. I imagine a lot of you have too. The bar's open, and let's carry what Fred stood for with us forever. Thank you.